Once I am done with the general introductions, I shall put off my video camera as well. So, today we have an amazing presenter, Dr. Maria Fernandez Jesus. She will be presenting Sharing Our Collective Futures Radical Political Imagination Towards Climate Justice. Recognizing the importance of building alternative imaginaries to tackle the climate crisis, we discuss how radical political imagination can be a powerful tool for climate change, climate challenges, climate injustices worldwide. Drawing on empirical research with youth and their political imaginaries, we will explore barriers to political imagination and how imagination might shape collective action towards collective futures. So, thank you everybody for joining us today, and I hand over to Dr. Fernandez Jesus to continue the discussion.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to give this talk to you all. Yeah, and what I bring today um, is around the concept of political imagination and how political imagination can be used to advance climate justice. And I will start with some a little bit of theoretical concepts around imagination. And then in the second part of the presentation, I will present some empirical work with youth in Portugal around political agency and political imagination. Okay, so yeah, I think you all know about climate change. I will not spend much time on that. There is a consensus. We are living in a hell in terms of climate crisis. And what is more problematic about this is that either the scale and also the pace of climate action is not enough for the amount of risks and impacts that people are facing. Just to give you an idea, in this paper, some authors identify that in the last 3 decades, the global carbon, so CO2, increased around 60% in the last decades. So it seems there is a lot of discussion about climate action and mitigation and adaptation policies, but what we see is an increase of increased risks of climate change. And there is also, and there has been some recent documentations around this. So there is several examples of maladaptation. So even adaptation policies that are being developed, they are, instead of decreasing risks and vulnerability associated with climate change, they are increasing vulnerability. So communities are becoming more vulnerable, not only due to climate change, but also to climate policies, specifically in this case, adaptation policies. And this and other factors have led some authors to talk about imagination or climate change as a failure of our imagination. So we are not being able to solve the issue, and this is according to Moore and Milk-Rate 2017. This is because there is a crisis of our imagination due to 3 main factors. The first one is that it's too difficult to comprehend and to respond to climate change. The second one is that there is a crisis in terms of sociological imagination. So we lack the ability to see the role of social structures in amplifying and reinforcing social injustice and climate change. And then there is also a crisis in terms of our lack of collective ability to imagine a set of different and possible futures, so different kind of climate action, forms of actions that are not yet invented or that haven't been tried yet. Um, this is not in my view, but also in the view of several climate activists, and in particular, Rebecca Solnit says that it's not that we lack the ability to imagine different futures, is that there is many powerful forces that constrain our ability to imagine. So capitalism and other systems of oppression and discrimination, they limit our ability to imagine something new, something different. So in this sense, imagination is not only in crisis, but is also a tool of resistance. So there is plenty of authors saying that there is a clear link between imagination and action. So imagination is either a guide to action, an instrument of social change, a key for radical social change. It's at the heart of social change, and it's really able to shape how we act and how we address climate change. So it's not only it's particularly important to think about imagination, because imagination is very much linked with action and what we do to address climate change. And there has been many different ways of conceptualizing imagination. Imagination is not a new term, either in psychology. So in psychology, for example, we have been talking about imagination for a while, but the kind of imagination that I'm talking is different, in the sense of it's not just something that is in our head. So our ability to see to predict, or to think about to project, not predict, to project our future, but it's more about a collective way of thinking about our future, so a collective future, and also about thinking about political issues. So how, in terms of imaginings, of issues related with how society work and how society could work at the political level. So I think that the concept of radical political imagination is quite useful to bring to the discussion around climate change, because it's emphasized this collective and political dimension that is needed to address climate change. At the same time, and within the climate change literature, there is plenty of discussion at the moment around this idea of climate political imaginaries. And as I said, it's political because it involves rethinking how we are organized as society, and how we are, even including, but not only, our political institutions. And I think that the concept of political imagination, political imaginaries, is actually quite. So I'm not sure why. Keeping. Okay. The concept of political imaginaries is quite useful as well. So we need political imagination to create those political imaginaries that are basically our shared understandings of the present, but that are linked with visions of possible futures. And I think that the futures in the plural is quite important, because it emphasizes this idea of many different ways, many different possible futures. There is not one, it shouldn't be just one vision of the future. We need to look at climate change from a perspective of multiple political imaginaries, of multiple solutions to address the impact and the risks associated with climate change. The political imaginaries, in this sense, they are, as I said, imagination is associated with action, so they guide the kind of actions that we produce. At the same time, they enable practices, they shape our decisions, and they tend to influence what we considered feasible and not feasible to address climate change. So very much all the solutions that we implement to address climate change. There has been some authors saying that we live in an era of where there is some dominant framings of the future, and it tends to be associated with the role of technology in addressing climate change. But at the same time, especially if you look at social movements, there is plenty of diverse and multiple imaginaries that are struggling to coexist in our society, and we should be looking at those, because the most radical imaginaries can be found in social movements. So social movements, they have a key role in addressing climate change, not only because of this, but especially because they are producing different versions of the future. It's not only in social movements. You can also find radical political imaginaries in arts, in the media, sometimes, well, maybe more free and independent media, in popular culture. So there is plenty of imaginaries out there. But social movements tend to be associated with those that are more radical to address climate change. At the same time, and I give you just to give you an example of the farmers movement. It's a recent movement. Well, at least the recent protests in Europe around contesting actually some of the policies that the European Union is trying to implement. But this is, in my view, this is an example of a social movement that got a lot of media visibility. But they are, there is some indications that they are associated with far right ideology, and I mean, not only this in the farmers movement. If you think about other community-led initiatives, there has been a rise of far right promoting their own visions of what should be the future and how we should be addressing climate change. And usually those visions are not concerned with climate justice, so they tend to reproduce and amplify the already existing social injustice that we live. So this means that social movements, on one hand, they tend to be the more radical in terms of bringing alternative political imaginaries of the future, but at the same time, we need to look at not all social movements are radical and have climate justice at guiding their actions and proposals. And I think that this brings some questions for thinking about radical political imagination and climate justice. So we need to link imagination to climate justice and ask questions like what type of imagination we should be supporting to respond to the multiple and intersecting social injustice that we are living on. At the same time, how we can amplify those imaginaries that are more radical and that are more inclusive and promoters of social justice, and also try to understand the barriers that those particular imaginaries are encountering when trying to have some visibility and to make some change. And one of the things that I have been particularly interested in is how imagination shape political agency, particularly among groups and communities that have been historically marginalized in climate change debates, discussions, and policies. And what I bring now is the example of the Portuguese youth climate justice movement, where we look at at young people's political imaginaries and how that shaped and contributes to shape their collective action. Just to give you some overview, the climate movement in Portugal is quite visible at the moment. It using it's something that happened in the last, probably in the last decades. The environmental and the climate movement started to get more visibility, and especially the youth climate movement has been particularly strong in the last more or less 5-6 years. Just to give you an idea, we did a mapping of the climate movement in Portugal, and we identified almost 300 groups working around climate change, or either supporting, so working at the intersection of different topics, including climate change. And they have been using many different types of actions, from demonstrations, but also to prefigurative and performative actions. I think this is quite relevant, the number of groups. And as I said, the youth movement in particular has been particularly visible in the last few years. And there has been some research on that, but there is still a lack of attention to youth voices, particularly from marginalized groups and communities, and also how they are conceptualizing different climate futures, not only their actions, but also not only in terms of collective actions, but also in terms of their everyday ways of relating to climate change. And this is what we are interested in this project. So Just Futures is a project that started in 2021. This is the last year of the project, and as part of the project, we had many different tasks. This is an interdisciplinary project involving 3 different universities and people from communication sciences, psychology, educational sciences. So it's quite interdisciplinary, but around social sciences and humanities, I would say. And I have been particularly involved in task number 4, that is about eliciting imaginaries of the future, and we use focus group discussion with young people in Portugal to approach this. So as I said, we were interested on how young people think about their roles in terms of addressing and climate change and constructing different political futures. We are also interested in the barriers and possible constraints that young people from different backgrounds faced when they try to engage with climate change, and also when in their visions of possible futures. We did several focus group discussions. We use a photo elicitation activity to promote the discussion. So we ask young people to either bring a picture that represented how they related with climate change, or they could select one of the pictures. So we had a set of pictures, and they could select one of the pictures that we had. And then we had some questions on how they engage with climate change in the present. And then we had some questions on the future, so how they imagine the futures and how they saw their role in addressing climate change. We analyzed this using reflexive thematic analysis and also some discourse analysis in one of the papers. So basically, we did 22 focus group discussions with, in total, 54 young people. And as you see in this table, young people from different backgrounds. So we had activists, so climate activists, but we also had young people that were involved in other types of movements. And then we also have young people that were not engaging in any kind of social movement or collective action. And then we specifically selected some young people from migrants, Black and racialized young people in Portugal, and Roma people as well. So we wanted to hear minoritized perspectives around this. Yeah, and as I said, we kind of had this three different lens. So first we wanted to have the perspective of minoritized groups, but also how young people in general from different groups conceptualize it, political agency and different futures. And we were also interested on how they their visions about this, the political imaginaries. And we focus in particular on the visions of climate activists. I don't have time to address all of that. I will just give you some highlights especially in terms of the perspectives of minoritized youth, and also in terms of political agency and how that relates with different visions of the future and different ways of acting. So in terms of highlights from minoritized youth voices, we saw that young people tend to focus and give priority to localized and everyday forms of actions. Most of them were not involved, well, I think all of them were not involved in the climate movement, but they had experiences of engaging with community initiatives in their own local neighborhood or community. There was also a very broad sense of that they were not prepared to engage with climate change, that they didn't have enough knowledge to do it. And at the same time, they felt disempowered about their role in addressing climate change, and also on the role of politicians in doing what is needed to address climate change. So they were quite skeptical about it. But at the same time, they reclaimed opportunities and spaces to participate, and they wanted to have more opportunities to engage with climate change. One thing that I think it's particularly interesting in this group is how they perceive everything as a barrier. So from political barriers to individual resources. So this is just a sample of what they said, but it kind of shows that more than they did identify many different barriers, but it seems that there was a shared feeling that everything is a big barrier. So they only see barriers to engage with climate change, with climate change, to work collectively, to engage and to do something about climate change. So this tends to lead to feelings like, I feel like I can't do anything about it. What is the point? And at the same time, it is also related in some ways with this idea that they were not even able, some of them, to imagine different futures. They did struggle a lot with activity to imagine the future. And this is an example with a young from a non-activist minoritized group, where he says that I wouldn't, or at least I wouldn't be able to have a vision on how it will be. So he's not even, after the moderator insisted to, but can you imagine, can you tell me how it would look like? He struggled a lot with giving an answer with how the future might look like in his opinion. In the climate activist groups, you would see more elaborated visions of political futures. I will not read, this is a big quote, but it gives you an idea of things that they mention. They were able to imagine, they were able to name, to list some things in terms related with how our societies could work from a political level, so more participatory democracy approaches, more connection with nature, with people, a vegan world, communities that work together in at a small scale. But basically, they were able to bring some ideas, not only positive visions of the future, but also negative, so some dystopias as well, but they provided more elaborated climate futures perspectives. And one thing that we started to see in the data is that some of those imaginaries, or the lack of ability to discuss or to bring to share some of their visions of the future, seem to be associated with specific ways of perceiving their own role in addressing climate change. So one of the things that we have been working is on this relationship between political agency, so how young people conceptualize their own political agency in relation to climate change, and how that translates in different forms of action. And we identify forms of action and also visions of the future. And we identify 4 different youth political agency conceptions. I will just give you some examples of how we are conceptualizing those 4 ways of looking at political agency in relation to climate change. The first one is more transformational in the sense that young people, it's associated with climate activists and how they use confront and direct action to express how they feel about climate change, but more importantly, how they are unhappy with the political situation and how they want change. So collective action is used as a way to call attention to the problem and to raise awareness on the need to rethink social structures. So it's very much associated with changing the system while addressing climate change. And it's also very much associated with global views on climate justice. Yeah, and it's more, as I said, it's more common around climate activists. And they do have this, this was very strong among our sample of climate activists. They do believe that being confrontational is the way, is the path to address climate change, most likely because they tried different ways of acting, and now they also in the Portuguese movement you see a shift towards more radical and direct forms of action. But I found quite interesting that they believe that there isn't other alternatives. So they feel that they have to struggle and to engage in this way because otherwise they won't have a future. So this way of acting is a way of reclaiming power and agency over what is going on, and at the same time is seen as the only possible way of bringing about change. This view was not common among minoritized groups and also non-climate activists. Those groups tended to be more interested on forms of collective action that were within the system, so without confronting the social structures. So they use collective action, particularly collective action at the local level, as a way to participate and to be part of the system without creating a radical shift with it. But at the same time, there is some tension there. They feel that they tend to believe in the system. They wish to trust on political institutions. There's this feeling that they wanted to trust politicians and political institutions, but at the same time, they realize that they are not doing enough to address climate change. Yeah, this is an example of a quote where they talk about this, and in this particular example, they use the youth parliament as a form of action that they believe that can help to overcome the gap between politicians and youth, and they they use the youth parliament as a way to talk with them, to influence politicians. But as I said before, at the same time, they believe that they are not doing enough. But there is this sense that they can't do it alone. So they need politicians to help them to address climate change and other challenges as well. Other young people, they talk more about the individual action as a way to engage with climate change, their way to engage with climate change. And this is more common, again, on non-activist groups, but also some activists also use it. Thanks. Not, well, as I was saying, so individual action is used also as a way to set an example. And what I find quite interesting here is that although some of they perform individual actions associated with pro-environmental behaviors, but they don't believe that those actions are sufficient to address climate change. So there is a lot of discussion in our focus groups around this. So they are not effective enough, they are not sufficient enough to address the further dimension of the problem. Still, they think that individual actions are important to set an example, to inspire other people to engage with the topic. And what is also quite interesting that they do have this critical approach about individual action. Some of them believe that this is a way of blaming the individuals, and some of the others also discuss the role that sometimes this focus on individual action plays on the mobilization of collective action that is more radical and more direct, but they feel that they have to do something, and something is for them having pro-environmental behaviors or acting at the local level in the community. And finally, the final or the four political agency conception that we identify is more related with this feeling of don't have power to address climate change. And this is particularly strong in our minority-sized groups. There is this vision that they don't have the knowledge, the resources, or even the ability to impact any change at all. And just a final quote that I find it particularly interesting and shows that how this feeling of lack of power is related with visions of the future as well. So in this quote, Christiana, she is saying that she doesn't see a good future. I can't, but at the same time, she doesn't see any possibilities of change anytime soon. And she gives the example of a music in Portuguese. It's the group is called Diolinda, and they have a music that is about civic engagement and the lack of commitment with civic engagement. So there's this vision that people tend to delay their action. And this is something that she associated with climate activism as well. So we are all, as society, saying that I will meet you there. Go on without me, start to implement some changes, do some activism, and I will be there. But the truth is that at the end of the day, they are not getting anywhere. So they are not getting there. so they are not joining. So we are always postponing action, and also postponing joining climate activisms, climate activists. And I found this particularly interesting in how this young person associated both the music and at the same time related with the future, and also with this vision of inaction at the present. So yeah, just some final remarks on. I do hope that we have time to discuss for the discussion, and this is still working in progress. We are still thinking about the data, but and I'm not sure if we if we have closed answers. I think that this project also brought new questions, and there is a lot of things that we still need to explore around this role between agency, collective action, and political imagination, and especially in terms of how can we, either as social scientists, community psychologists, or psychologists in general, how we can amplify climate justice voices, so how we can amplify those political imaginaries that are more radical, that are grounded on climate justice, how we can use our research for that, but also how we can, at the same time, contribute to reduce power inequalities and give more space for certain groups and communities, particularly those that are more affected by climate change, to have power. Yeah. And just to finish with one quote that was mentioned by one of the participants, and this participant in particular was a young migrant, and she mentioned a lack of spaces to imagine as when she was trying to engage with that question around how do we imagine the future. She mentioned there's a lack of spaces to imagine. So I cannot even imagine because I didn't have the opportunity to imagine, and I feel that there isn't spaces to imagine. And I think that this represents is a powerful statement on what we can do to give more visibility to those. Give more visibility to climate imaginaries, but also to put some action in creating those spaces to imagine, or give more visibility to already existing spaces, because there is many different, especially in local communities and social movements, there are already some imagination going on, radical imagination. Okay, so yeah, I would be very happy to discuss those findings with you. If you have any question, comments, I would appreciate. And if you want to chat about this, just send me an email, and I will be happy to answer as well. Fatima, do you want to have questions?
Yes, we have some comments in the chat box.
Okay,
one
so I
of the
stop
comments
sharing.
is brilliant presentation, and thank you for the wonderful work. And then we have some questions. How do we engage and leverage effective change so that we can imagine it?
Okay. So how do we engage in leverage effective change so we can imagine? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think this is probably questions of any human conditions. Probably. Thanks for the question. I'm not sure if you want to say something, to add something to your question. We do have time, so if you want, you can talk.
Caroline, if you'd like to unmute yourself and
Yes,
maybe engage. Thank
I
you.
was just finding the button. Okay. So you mentioned quite a few times that there's such a sense of despondency that people don't necessarily even imagine that it's possible. And then I would be curious to understand what would be that thing that leverages that change so that it actually becomes imaginable. And I think it's something that not only relates to the work that you do, but it could it's like the answer to the universe and everything in it. So I know this is a big question in terms of human change, but I would be very curious to understand what would make one group of youth imagine things and what would make another group not imagine it, and how we could leverage that change so that others could imagine it too.
Yeah, I think one thing. Thank you for that. Yeah, yeah, it's quite challenging, and I'm not sure if I have a proper solution. I don't, but um, I think there is something about the lack of spaces and the lack of opportunities to young people, but also to other groups and communities to engage with imaginative work. So we don't have much time to think about collective futures. There is a lot and many different forces trying to block our imagination. So one small or a small, maybe it's big, but one radical thing that we could do is to start to create more spaces in our communities to just think about our collective futures, to think about possible solutions and pathways to get there. And this is something that social movements, climate justice movements, they are doing this. They do this. So, as researchers or practitioners, perhaps we need to join those movements and try to support those movements in amplifying those political views of the future. And at the same time, we could, and this leads me to more participatory action research projects where we need to be engaging with youth in a way that gives them the space and the opportunity to create climate futures. I don't think we have this enough, particularly in research. Most of the research that we do and what I presented today is about trying to understand how they see this, how they discuss this. And I think we need to move to more participatory action research. And I would, yeah, there is plenty of examples of people that are already trying to do this. And you had, I think, in this seminar, the last time with Carly Chock, that does a lot of participatory action research with youth. And I think it's a way of promoting and creating those spaces for imagination to emerge. Thanks. I'm not sure if this answered, but we do have another question. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, we have a hand up by Hyundai. You may go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you, Fatima. It's actually Hunadi. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm a PhD student, and I am actually in my process of analysis, and I did somewhat similar to what you are presenting today. But I just wanted to speak specifically on the almost the last part where you spoke about the disempowered action. So my study was primarily based in a township, and it was with young people who are between 12 and 15, so quite younger than the ones that you are speaking of here today. And I find it quite sad that even at the age of 13, you know, the young people actually spoke about this being disempowered. You know, they spoke a lot about having had done something, but then they would say that the government doesn't then support them or assist them in terms of sustaining those solutions that they've brought up about. So at the end of the day, then they just feel quite despondent and what's the point? So I found that quite sad. And I think now that brought me to myself and thinking about the impact that left me that left me with, you know, as a researcher. And I think I just wanted to pose this question, I suppose, in terms of are there ways that, you know, as researchers, you know, and I guess the people who are actually perhaps maybe co-creating or assisting the people to create these spaces that we're speaking about? Are there ways that we can, I don't know, help with managing all of these emotions that their despondencies actually, leave us with? I'm not sure if I'm, yeah. So I think I'm more on the researcher and the feeling that all of this then leaves you with. How do we manage that? If there's a way.
Yeah, I struggle with that as well. I think it leads again to how we do research. And yeah, maybe I'll just give you an example. Many years ago, when I did my first, or the first focus group discussions in my PhD, and it was not about climate, but it was about youth participation. And I was surprised because students, they were also quite young, and they mentioned that that was the first time that they had opportunity to discuss about social and political and environmental issues in general, social issues in general. So they were in 12 years or 11 years at the school, and they felt that they never had one opportunity, not even one, to discuss social issues. And I think that this reflects the role of school also in creating spaces for young people to engage with climate and with other social relevant issues. And also the role of research, as you were saying, how we can use research not only to understand things, but also to help and to empower, or it's not really to empower, to give the space for young people to have power and influence over social and climate change issues, I would say. I think that this demands a radical shift in how we do research. So more applied research, more committed with social change. And again, more critical and participatory methodologies as a way not only to capture their views, but also to sing and to encourage some imagination, some actions, and long-term research as well. I feel that the way that we tend to do research, that I tend to do research, and there's something that it's also promoted by funding agencies and universities, is like, you have to do it, you have to analyze it, and you have to publish. And some of those things need more time and need a continuous work with, especially with young people, so they can trust you, so you can engage with them. And I feel that we need more of this long-term relationships with the communities that we are working with in our research. Yep. Thanks for your question. If you want to add something, feel free to do it.
So, Maria, I have a thought, and I want maybe to hear your ideas on it. But how can we cultivate hope and build leadership skills with youth to facilitate these imaginaries? Because it would be lovely in a research setting to give youth the opportunity to do this type of work, but how else can we cultivate the hope and leadership for a better imaginary future?
I think it's through action that is effective, that makes some change, even if minor. Some of those examples of disempowerment, some of them they came from experiences of action that were not effective, that didn't lead to anything. It didn't brought any kind of change. So probably we need to give more visibility to forms of action that were effective. Try to give visibility to that. I think that we don't talk much about examples of communities over the world that are making changes, even if at the local level. Yeah, that could help. And working in partnership with young people in developing action, collective action that leads to something. And this might need to involve working with institutions, with governments as well. I don't know, politicians, but there is many gaps between youth and communities and political change. So how can we reduce those gaps as researchers might help to create some hope. I don't know. It's quite a difficult, again, another difficult question. Not sure if I have an answer, but working with young people in partnership with them might be one way, and giving more visibility to already existing forms of imagination that are grounded on climate justice. Support them, accompany those movements. So having this more close relationship with social movements, I would say, as well.
I like that you also mentioned schools as a system and the possibility of having projects and programs within a school system to facilitate that imagination, because yeah, I think schools have such an important role to play. It's just the question, how do we then engage schools to have these projects run, creating those spaces for imaginaries for just future.
Yeah. Trying to bring schools to research projects and being more close to schools and to local communities, avoid this also gap between academy and the rest of the world. I think not only, yeah, maybe we need to do the opposite. Instead of inviting them to join us, we need to join them where they are. So try to understand what they are doing and try to see how we can support and amplify the work that they are doing. And there is some examples of schools that work around this, or either with small projects and even research projects that are trying to connect with schools. One of the person that is part of this project, Carla Malafayer, she works with schools, and she, in a different project, she brought many different schools together to address some of the local challenges identified with youth around climate change, and they developed a plan of action, and they had even some public meetings with policymakers, media, to give visibility to the problems identified by young people, and at the same time to offer some solutions for those problems. So giving young people space to participate in climate change policies and give them power, not only voice, power, in the sense that when they contribute, they should be heard, and they should be taken, their voices and proposals need to be considered. School integration, asking how we can integrate with existing school initiatives to align with them. I think that is
There's a comment above that as well. This might be something to think about as part of the ethical imperative for collaborative participation in research, that research is beyond the mere extraction of information.
It should be committed with social justice, and in this case, it should be committed with climate justice. I think that every work that we do with youth, with local communities around climate change, should be grounded on climate justice. And I think this is the only way to actually give some hope and to support some of those imaginaries that are being constructed, and to help to create spaces for more imagination to happen.
And then we have one more comment. It certainly highlights a broader role for researchers, but I suspect there needs to be a lot more advocacy around support from funders.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but I think the whole research and academia system needs to be. We need to rethink it. So, and I definitely believe that there is more need for having an activist role as researchers as well to do some advocacy work. But it's all about impact. It's all about why we do research. Should be because if you do research on climate justice, should be about bringing climate justice to right. And to bring climate justice, we need, or to achieve some forms of climate justice, we need to support and need to be engaged in the struggles that local communities and groups are facing. Otherwise, our work is just not relevant for them as well. So yeah, I think there is this advocacy and activist role of research that we don't discuss enough, and funders are definitely probably not supported. No, they don't support it. But if we, yeah, maybe if we sell this as impact and how our work can make some contributions to the communities that are participating in the study, might be one way. I think the visions around the impact of research could help on this.
I'm just wondering if it's possible that maybe we as researchers could go through a process of imagining a better future for research. So you start doing a better imaginary for justice and politics and a better human future. And we as researchers have a responsibility to then think about what can we do better as researchers as well, because surely we have power and voice within each of our institutions to contribute towards a more just research as well.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. Yeah, even our work as researchers is constrained. Yeah, we need more imagination. And definitely, I agree with you. Thanks.
So,
Research reimagined. Yeah, I think that would give a beautiful paper.
we have 2 minutes left, and then we would have come to the conclusion of this amazing webinar. If there are any last shout outs or comments that anybody would like to share, please do so. Yeah, I don't see any comments in the chat box or any hands up. The comments coming through is thank you for such an inspirational talk. It's a wonderful presentation. Um, Jennifer Kunze, she wrote a paper on how we might do some of these things.
If you
So
could share.
Jennifer, yes, Jennifer, if you could please email me fatima.peters@univ.ac.za. If anyone in the room has any resources that you would like to share, please send them to me. I will distribute it to the people that are currently in the room today. The Climate, Environmental, and Psychology Division is also keen to have not only podcasts but future webinars. So if there's anyone in the room that is interested in engaging with us around looking towards social justice and climate change, just futures, and those types of topics, please do email me as well. So with that, I just would like to say, Dr. Maria, thank you so much for always giving such a lovely presentation and helping us to really think about where we could go in the climate change and climate justice futures. So from the CEPD, thank you so much for your time and effort and engagement with us.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks. And thanks for the questions and comments. I really enjoyed them.
Okay. So from me, Fatima, bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye everyone.